Hello and welcome back to Lingering Light, your quiet harbor in a world that often measures us by the thickness of our wallets rather than the depth of our hearts. Tonight, we are opening a transformative and deeply challenging book by the social psychologist Erich Fromm, To Have or to Be? Erich Fromm was born on March 23, 1900, in Frankfurt, Germany. He later emigrated to the United States and became one of the most influential social psychologists and humanistic thinkers of the 20th century. Fromm argued that the modern soul is caught in a quiet, spiritual fever because we have been trained to define ourselves by what we have, our bank accounts, our square footage, our impressive titles, rather than who we are. He warned that the more we focus on having, the less we actually exist. He believed the having mode is about consumption, hoarding, and a constant fear of loss, while the being mode is about sharing, creating, and being vibrantly alive in the now. To help us lighten the heavy luggage of our possessions and discover the hidden richness of our souls, let's meet Victor, the curator, Sterling. Victor is 74 and a retired investment banker whose home is so impeccably decorated it looks like a high-end museum where no one is allowed to touch anything. For 50 years, Victor lived by the secret, exhausting mantra that he who dies with the most toys wins. His house is a cathedral of stuff, rare first-edition books with spines that have never been cracked, antique clocks that chime at slightly different, nerve-wracking intervals, and expensive mahogany furniture that is far too delicate to actually sit on comfortably. Victor spends hours every day dusting his collection and checking the humidity levels as if he were guarding the crown jewels. He is surrounded by immense wealth, yet he feels oddly hollow, a ghost haunting his own climate-controlled storage unit. That is, until he began a massive downsizing to move to a small cottage by the sea and found himself reading from, "The more you have, the less you are. If I am what I have, and if I lose what I have, who then am I?" Victor stood in the center of his grand living room, surrounded by an army of brown cardboard boxes. His task was to get rid of half of his belongings, but every time he touched a porcelain vase or a silver tray, he felt a sharp, physical pang in his chest, as if he were losing a limb. "I can't possibly donate this," he muttered to the empty room, clutching a heavy silver serving platter he hadn't polished, let alone used, since the turn of the millennium. "This is me. This represents my 1994 bonus. This is my success." He opened from and read a passage that felt like a splash of cold water. "In the having mode of existence, my relationship to the world is one of possessing and owning. If I define myself by my property, then the loss of that property is a loss of myself. I become a frightened nobody." Victor caught his reflection in a $5,000 gilded mirror he'd bought in Paris. He realized with a jolt of terror that if he took away the mirror, the house, the German car, and the investment portfolio, he didn't actually know who was left standing there. He had spent his entire life building a shell of having so thick and ornate that the being inside, the actual man named Victor, had practically withered away from lack of sunlight. "Am I just a collection of expensive wood, silver, and well-tailored wool?" Victor asked himself, his voice sounding small and lonely in the high-ceilinged room. He realized that his panic about losing his things was actually a deep, existential panic about losing his soul. For the first time, he saw his prized possessions not as trophies, but as heavy anchors keeping him from floating. He took a deep breath and placed the silver tray into the donate box. It hit the bottom with a thud, and for a second, Victor felt lighter, as if he had just exhaled a breath he'd been holding since 1994. Victor's house was a masterpiece of things he didn't use, but merely possessed. He had a massive library of thousands of leather-bound books, yet he spent his evenings scrolling through his phone or watching mindless news because he felt too mentally crowded to actually read. He had the knowledge on the shelves, but he didn't incorporate a single word of it into his character. He was a wealthy man who was intellectually starving in a pantry full of locked cans. Fromm's critique was sharp and struck Victor right in the ego. Knowing in the having mode is about possessing knowledge. Knowing in the being mode is an act of productive thinking. To have an idea is to store it like a trophy. To be in an idea is to be transformed by it. Victor picked up a rare 18th-century copy of Plato that he had purchased decades ago primarily to impress a rival colleague. He realized, with a flush of shame, that he had never even read the introduction. He had been a knowledge collector, a person who accumulated books like stamps. He wasn't a thinker, he was a book owner. "I've been treating my mind like a warehouse for things I never intend to ship out," Victor mused, running his thumb over the gold-leafed pages. He began to pack his books into crates for the local university library, keeping only 10 volumes, books he committed to truly sitting with, arguing with, and learning from. He discovered that reading one poem deeply contributed more to his being than owning 1,000 encyclopedias did to his having. The less he owned, the more room he had in his brain to actually ponder the universe. The silence in the house started to feel less like emptiness and more like an invitation. As the house slowly emptied and the echoes grew louder, Victor began to fill his newfound time with being activities, things that produced absolutely nothing for the market but everything for the heart. He started taking long, aimless walks without checking his pedometer or his watch. He began to spend his mornings in the small backyard, not for the result of having the most manicured lawn on the block, but for the process of feeling the cool, damp dirt between his fingers. From described the being mode in a way that resonated with Victor's soul. Being is not a state of passivity, but of inner activity, the productive use of one's human powers. It means to renew oneself, to grow, to flow, to love, and to finally overcome the prison of one's isolated ego. Victor noticed that when he sat on a simple, weathered wooden chair in his garden, he felt more alive and connected to the world than he ever did while perched on his antique velvet sofa. When he was in the having mode, he was always anxious about the future. Would the fabric fade? Would the value drop? When he was in the being mode, he was only in the now, watching a sparrow take a bath in a puddle. "I'm not a retired senior vice president anymore," he told a neighbor while pruning a stray rose bush, his shirt sleeves rolled up and his tie long gone. "I'm just a man who is currently fascinated by the way a rose petal feels like velvet." He found that being didn't require a quarterly budget or a prestigious resume. It only required his undivided presence. He began to feel a vibrant, humming energy that he hadn't experienced since he was a schoolboy, the infectious energy of someone who no longer needs to prove his worth to a world of critics. Victor realized that his relationships had also been trapped in the having mode. He had viewed his children as his products, extensions of his own success, and his friends as social assets to be managed. He was always trying to direct them, offer strategic advice, or manage their choices, which had created a cold, invisible distance between them. He wanted to have a perfect family, rather than be a father. From wrote a sentence that broke Victor's heart: "Love in the having mode means restricting, imprisoning, or controlling the object one loves. Love in the being mode means to care for, to know, to respond, to affirm, and to simply enjoy the other person's existence." Victor called his son, David, not to inquire about his career progress or investment strategy, but simply to ask, "How are you feeling today?" For the first time, he didn't offer a single piece of unsolicited advice. He didn't try to have a successful son, he tried to be with another human soul. "Dad, you're different lately," David said, his voice hesitant and then softening. "You're actually listening to me." "I'm just here, David," Victor replied, a lump forming in his throat. He realized that when he stopped trying to possess the people in his life like items in his collection, they actually started to draw closer to him of their own accord. He discovered that the most valuable thing he could give wasn't a trust fund or a mahogany table, but his undivided, non-judgmental attention. His being was the greatest inheritance he could ever leave behind. Victor finally moved into his small cottage by the shore. It had white walls, a few comfortable chairs that invited naps, his 10 well-loved books, and a large window overlooking the restless gray woods. To his old banking friends who visited, it seemed like he had lost everything in a terrible stroke of bad luck. They saw a man who had shrunk. But to Victor, it felt like he had finally found the entire world. From's final promise in the book became Victor's daily reality: "If I can give up the having mode, the being mode will naturally emerge. The less I am concerned with my ego and my property, the more I am part of the world." Victor sat on his porch as the moon rose over the trees, casting a silver path on the water. He had no alarms to set, no precious collections to guard against thieves, and no social status to defend at cocktail parties. He was just a man, breathing in the salt air, an infinitesimal but vital part of the vast, living mystery of the universe. I used to think I was the king of my castle, Victor whispered with a peaceful, radiant smile. But I was really just the tired janitor of my own clutter. Now, I have nothing to show for myself, and yet, for the first time in my life, I am everything. He realized that the ultimate luxury isn't owning a piece of the world, but belonging to the whole of it. He was 74 years old, and he was finally, truly, and purely, alive. As Victor settled into his coastal cottage, he noticed something he hadn't expected. In his old life, people came to his mansion to admire his possessions, the wine, the art, the view. They left discussing his collection. Now, people came to his small cottage just to be near him. He recalled a profound thought from the person who has moved from having to being becomes a source of life. They do not need to give things to be generous, their very presence is a gift of vitality to others. One rainy afternoon, a former colleague, still caught in the high-stakes world of finance, stopped by. The man was a bundle of nerves, checking 2 phones and complaining about a lost contract. In the old days, Victor would have joined the fray, offering possession-based advice on how to win back the money. Instead, Victor just sat there, hands relaxed on his knees, offering the man a simple cup of tea. He didn't try to have an answer, he just was a calm space. "Victor," the colleague said after 20 minutes of silence, "I don't know what it is, but I feel like I can breathe in this room. You don't have anything here, but I feel like I'm in the presence of someone who owns the world." Victor smiled, realizing that when you stop trying to fill the room with objects, you become the room itself. By having nothing to protect, he had become a fortress of peace for others. His emptiness wasn't a void, it was a reservoir of life that he could finally pour into every person who walked through his door. My dear friends, at Lingering Light, Victor Sterling discovered that the more he let go of what he had, the more he grew into who he truly was. Erich Fromm's message is a resonant call to all of us who feel weighed down by our possessions, our reputations, or our past titles. The goal of life is to be much, not to have much. Take a look around your room tonight. How many of your things do you truly possess, and how many of them have quietly taken possession of you? I have a question for you tonight. If you had to get rid of half of your possessions tomorrow morning, which items would be the hardest to let go of? Why do those things feel like you? And more importantly, who would you be if those things were gone? Share your being versus having thoughts in the comments below. Let's help each other lighten the load. And until our next gathering, stop collecting. Start being. Stay in the light, unburdened, and beautifully present light of your own soul. Good night, dear friends. Show some love by hitting like and subscribe. Also, don't forget to leave a comment. Thank you.